This past week, the Las Vegas Raiders made an interesting change with Tyree Wilson during the game against the Kansas City Chiefs, and it really paid off. We're going to dive into that and also discuss what Antonio Pierce said about play calling, which I don't fully agree with. So let's jump right in. First off, let's talk about Tyree Wilson. I have to admit I wasn't too keen on the Raiders drafting him, especially with players like Jalen Carter and Darnell Wright still available. Tyreek felt more like a project pick, someone who would need time to develop. Usually this takes about 2 to 3 years, and now that we're in year 2, we're finally starting to see some bright moments from him. He even got his first sack of the season against the Chiefs, and it was a big one. This wasn't just a fluke sack. He went head-to-head with the left tackle and made a solid play that stood out as one of his best in terms of pass rushing. Against the Chiefs, Tyreek made several impressive plays. In fact, I'd argue this was the best game of his career. Previously, I noticed he often didn't make much of an impact on the field, but this time he was everywhere, making crucial plays. A key change the Raiders made was moving him inside. He spent about 70% of his snaps as a defensive tackle, primarily in the 3 technique position. For those unfamiliar, that means he lined up closer to the center, like top defensive tackles do. Standing at 6'6" inches and weighing 285 pounds, I think this inside role could be a great fit for him. While he can still play on the edge, we saw him shine when positioned inside against strong opponents. The Raiders have some depth with players like Clavon Chaisson stepping up, which could allow Tyreek to focus on playing inside more consistently. In this game, Tyreek went up against 2 of the best guards in the NFL, Trey Smith and Joe Thuney, and he held his own really well. He consistently pushed back Smith, even forcing the running back to change direction on a key play. Coaches emphasize that resetting the line of scrimmage is vital in stopping zone runs, and Tyreek did just that multiple times, making it harder for the offense to execute their plays. He showed that he could not only disrupt plays, but also compete effectively in pass protection. He gave both Smith and Thuney a tough time, using his size and length to his advantage. It's exciting to see him develop, especially against taller opponents like the Chiefs' left tackle, Wanya Morris. Tyreek was able to pressure the quarterback and make impactful plays throughout the game. Of course, Tyreek is still developing and has room for improvement. As Antonio Pierce mentioned in a recent press conference, the best way for him to grow is by getting more game experience. He's taken over 200 snaps this season and has shown steady progress. Despite missing the first 2 weeks, he's getting better with each game, and I can't wait to see where he goes from here. Looking ahead, the Raiders should think carefully about how to use him in specific matchups. For example, the Cincinnati Bengals have some massive tackles like Orlando Brown Jr. and Trent Brown, who could pose a challenge for Tyreek. In those situations, it might be wiser to utilize someone like Chaisson, who has the speed to handle those bigger, slower tackles. The Bengals don't have strong players in the interior line, which could create a great matchup for Tyreek Wilson. It might be wise to put him inside, where he can use his size and reach to his advantage. The Raiders should keep using him against smaller opponents and allow him to continue developing. I don't think he needs to be locked into the 3 technique position as a full-time defensive tackle. Instead, moving him around could be the best approach, giving him the chance to grow into a solid football player. From what I've seen over the past few weeks, I believe Tyreek has potential. If he keeps improving, I'm hopeful that by year 3, he'll come back stronger and be a productive player. Ideally, he could become a great complement to Max Crosby. Now let's shift gears and discuss what Antonio Pierce said about play calling, particularly regarding Luke Getsy. It's clear to many of us that the Raiders' biggest hurdle right now is the play calling, not the defensive line, offensive line, or even the quarterback position. When players like Aiden O'Connell and Jimmy Garoppolo struggle, it highlights how much the play calling needs improvement. Antonio Pierce acknowledged that play calling must get better. There have been missed opportunities, and while that's on the play caller, he also mentioned that penalties and missed assignments need to be cleaned up. He confirmed that Luke Getsy will remain the play caller for now, but I would argue that if he struggles against the Bengals, it could be time to consider a change. It doesn't mean Luke Getsy has to be fired, but if he keeps showing he can't get the job done, the Raiders need to look for alternatives. For instance, they could promote Scott Turner, the pass game coordinator. Turner has experience as a play caller and has had success in the past. If he can do even a little better than Getsy, it could make a real difference for the team. We need to assess whether Antonio Pierce is the right coach for the Raiders. If he mismanages games or the play calling continues to frustrate, it raises questions about his effectiveness. The Raiders need to find out if they can be successful with good play calling, because if they don't, they might end up looking for a new head coach next season. Another important point is the updates on the offensive line. Unfortunately, center Andre James got hurt last week and didn't practice today. This might actually be a good opportunity for the Raiders. Jackson P. Johnson has shown promise in his performance, and I'd say his tape suggests he has the potential to be a top 5 center. However, I need to see him perform well again, especially against the Bengals' strong defensive line. Interestingly, Antonio Pierce mentioned that Jackson P. Johnson didn't take any snaps at center during OTAs, so it's been a bit of a transition for him. The upcoming game will be a great chance to see how he handles the position against a tough opponent. Jackson Paris Johnson has played both left and right guard, but during training camp, he mostly focused on left guard. Interestingly, he had never played center in the NFL before stepping in. Despite that, he did an impressive job, identifying the mic, communicating with his teammates, and executing the plays smoothly. In the 14 snaps he played, minus a couple of spiked plays, he looked really good. For the Raiders, it might be beneficial to keep Andre James out for now and see if Jackson Paris Johnson can provide a spark. I believe that moving forward with Dylan Parham, Jordan Meredith, and Jackson Paris Johnson could give the Raiders their best interior offensive line this season. With DJ Glazer and Colton Miller at tackle, this lineup could be solid. Meredith is a smart player, and he and Paris Johnson communicate well, allowing them to adjust on the fly. This past week, they showed they could handle defensive line stunts effectively. Dylan Parham is also practicing, so it will be interesting to see how he fits back in, likely switching back to right guard while Meredith moves to left guard. Since Parham was our backup center, Jackson Paris Johnson has been taking snaps there while he was out. I'd love for the Raiders to stick with Paris Johnson even if James could play. I think there's a real chance he could become a top 5 center. This season might not lead to much in terms of wins, but it's a perfect opportunity to evaluate if we have a top talent at center. We need to find out if we'll need to draft guards in the upcoming draft, which is deep in talent. The last thing we want is to assume Jackson Paris Johnson will be our guard while Andre James is our center, only to discover next year that James isn't cutting it. Then, we'd be in a tough spot without a solid plan for the line. These next few weeks are crucial for figuring this out. If we can assess what we have, we might head into the offseason ready to build a strong offensive line. I envision a tough, physical group that can impose its will, much like the Pittsburgh Steelers. I watched the Steelers' offensive line recently, and I was impressed by their physicality. They drafted Darnell Washington, a huge tight end from Georgia, who plays like an extra offensive lineman. He holds his own against tough players like Max Crosby, showing the kind of toughness the Raiders need. The Steelers also have great linemen like Isaac Sumalo and rookie center Broderick Jones, who are strong and physical. If the Raiders want to play that bully style, they need to invest in similar players. When I see guys like Najee Harris running over defenders, it's clear they've built a tough offensive line. For the Raiders to truly become a physical team, they need to draft players who can match that mentality. I hope they give Jackson Paris Johnson a chance to show what he can do over the next few games. Let me know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time for more insights.